Why does an eraser erase graphite pencil but not colored pencil? I surveyed to find the most popular question, and this one won. I asked my daughter Helena the same, and she also chose this as the coolest question. I'll show you under the microscope at the end of the video. Watch until the end for some really cool questions in the middle, okay? Norio, why is there so much sand on the beaches? Where does all that sand come from? Depending on where you are, most of the sand could be poop. Check out this answer. The most obvious way that sea sand is formed is that the mountains wear down, right? The rock from the mountains wears down because of the sun, because of the rain, because of the wind, because of the animals that move around there. And the moment a piece of rock breaks off, it goes down the hill. It goes down until it reaches a river. And when it gets to the river, the water pushes it, and this rock keeps wearing down more and more. Until in the end, we have sand that also goes down the river, being pushed by the water until it reaches the sea, where it forms the beaches. This is the boring part of the story, because if we look at the sand, there are other things too. For example, remains of sea animals, shells, crab shells, bones, etc. They also break apart and end up accumulating in the sand. But the craziest thing I found out with this research is that there's a fish called the parrotfish, which goes there and eats the corals. Corals are made of calcium carbonate, so it's a hard thing, and this animal poops something that's practically sand. I'll admit that when I read this, I thought, well, that's just a tiny percentage. It's just a little bit of the sand that's this animal's poop. It probably doesn't make any difference, but it does. If the beach is in a place with few rivers, most of the sand, depending on the location, 70% of it can be made up of parrotfish poop. Is it worth a thumbs up or not? What happens to a balloon when we let it go? A helium balloon, right? We let it go, it rises to the sky. What will happen? Will it go all the way to the moon? When Manuel do Mundo reached 5 million subscribers, we launched a balloon into the stratosphere. The stratosphere is an atmospheric layer above where commercial airplanes fly at a very high altitude. And it's natural for these balloons to explode. When you fill a balloon with hydrogen or helium gas, you fill it at the same pressure as here on the ground. As this balloon goes up, it keeps the same pressure inside, but the pressure around it keeps decreasing. That means there will start to be a big difference between the pressure inside the balloon and the pressure outside. The balloon wants to burst. Most of the time, that's what will happen. But let's suppose you have a very strong or very flexible balloon that doesn't burst, that can keep inflating, and get really huge. So what will happen then? Will it keep rising forever? No. There will come a point when it stops rising and just stays up there. This happens because our atmosphere gets thinner and thinner with less and less density, less air. So there comes a point where the balloon starts to get heavy for that region it's in, and then it can't rise any further. And at that point, it will simply stop rising and just stay up there, but that won't last very long. The molecules, both hydrogen and helium gas, are very tiny, and they can get through the rubber of the balloons. And even if it's not made of rubber, they can still find some tiny hole to escape through. This is why flying balloons, even the pricier aluminized ones, inevitably descend after a short time. So, to sum up, either this balloon will explode, which is more likely, or it'll reach a point where it can't go up anymore. It'll slowly deflate over time and fall. If the Earth is round, why do we see it as flat? When we look at the horizon is flat. The horizon isn't round. We see the Earth as flat because it is very, very, very big. We can't see the curvature when we're this close to the planet. I'll show you this on the computer. I'm here in Photoshop, and the first thing I'm gonna do is draw a straight line, okay? An absolutely straight line, and then I'm gonna make a circle. Now, let's start zooming in on this circle and compare it to the straight line. From a distance, of course, you can see the circle perfectly. When I start to zoom in, now we can only see a part of it, just the top part. If I zoom in a little more, you notice that it's already starting to get hard to see. You can see by the little edge there that something is curved, but it's almost becoming flat. If I zoom in a little more, you notice that the line of the circle starts to blend in with the straight line. You can't see it anymore. It's really hard to tell that this is a circle. If I zoom in even more, you'll see that the two lines become almost parallel. Let me zoom out so you can see that it's really a circle. The shape is no longer recognizable at this level of zoom. I'm moving away as if I were a rocket. You start to see the circle, you start to see planet Earth. That's exactly what happens with the view we have of the planet. When you get too close, you can't see the curve anymore. Leonardo Lopes, a member of the channel, has that little electron there. He always picks a question for the members. Why do marine animals that are mammals have their tail fins horizontal while fish have them vertical? I'll admit that I had never noticed that before, and when I went to check, it's true. Take a shark, a carp, a tetra, a tilapia, they all have their tails vertical. And then when you look at a whale, a dolphin, an orca, a seal, their tails are horizontal. First of all, let's call it by the right name. That's called a caudal fin, right? That's what these animals use to move through the water. The tip of the tail, the part that has a different shape, like a paddle, helps these animals move underwater. And it's true, mammals all have it horizontally. This happens because these animals are completely different. They evolved in a different way over millions and millions of years. Fish, they never left the water. They have always been aquatic animals that developed a way to move really fast with their fins, with this, what is it called again? With the caudal fin vertical. In contrast, water mammals are animals that left the water and later returned. So because of that, they come from animals that once walked, and to walk you use your spine, but in a horizontal way. Just think about that mermaid costume. How do those women swim underwater? They move their tails like this, not like this, because the human spine, which is from a mammal, is much more prepared to move the tail this way. Mammals like whales benefit from this movement as they must surface to breathe, being unable to do so underwater. It comes up there, and through that hole on its back, it can take in air. And this horizontal movement, it's better. It's more efficient for coming up. Iberay, when we look at the clouds, are they the ones moving or are they still and we're seeing the movement of the earth? And why do we sometimes see such realistic shapes in the clouds? Well, first of all, the clouds aren't standing still while the earth spins. The clouds rotate along with the earth. They're moving along with planet Earth. So there's absolutely no way you could have the earth spinning and the cloud just standing still up there, especially because at the equator, the earth's rotation speed is about 1,600 kilometers per hour. So it would be an insane gale if the atmosphere didn't move along with the earth. In fact, if you watch the sky closely on a day with different clouds at different altitudes, you'll see that some layers move in one direction and other layers move in the opposite direction. I know this very well because this week we were here at Manuel du Mundo making a solar oven, and it was kind of cloudy, so we had to keep waiting for the sun to come out for the oven to work. It was a real struggle because clouds were moving in different directions, making it difficult to determine if the sun would come out or not. I don't know, that cloud is coming from the east, that other cloud is coming from the west. Anyway, it was a mess. Now, why do we see such well-defined things in the clouds? Sometimes you look and there's a sheep, there's a cow up there. How do clouds manage to form such perfect things? The truth is, clouds can't. It's our brain that tries hard to see these things in the clouds. See that figure over there? If you look at it without paying much attention, you'll see a skull, but there's no skull there at all. What happens is that your brain is always trying to see some pattern in things, trying to organize what's disorganized. And it's very useful for us to see faces in everything. Because imagine humans when they were in the forest and had to defend themselves from wolves, snakes, bears, and a lot of other things. You're constantly looking at the bushes to see if there's an eye, if there's a mouth there, and if there is, you have to climb a tree and run away. So our brain is really prepared to keep looking for faces everywhere. This phenomenon even has a name. It's Pareidolia. And it doesn't just happen to you, it happens to everyone. It's something natural for us. And Iberay, look at the Velcro under the microscope. See if it really has some little hooks. Your wish is my command. As my mother, Mrs. Maria Angela, would say, those who save, have. So in the manual, we have a box just for Velcro and backpack clasps. And here are several little pieces of Velcro. Looking at it with the naked eye like this, I can't really see the little hook. You have to look under the microscope. I can see it, yes. It's just that I've never tried cutting Velcro up this close. You'll see it under the microscope. Look, here are the Velcro hooks. Here we can clearly see this hook. It's not very pointed. I thought it would be more... The tip would be sharper, and that's what sticks to the other fabric, that softer part, and pulls. But this one is a really rough Velcro. A Velcro where these hooks are really big. I want to get another Velcro with smaller hooks. This Velcro is a more modern one. You run your hand here, it's not so rough, it doesn't snag your hand, it's really tiny. The workings of this one are not visible to the naked eye. Let's examine it under the microscopes. Ah, look at the tiny little hooks, they're so small. That's cool. Look, it's a much simpler little hook. It's literally a microscopic hook because we can't see it with the naked eye. It's like a tree, a Y shape there, with a smaller little hook and all, much closer to the surface. I put the two Velcros side by side here. The old one, which is this one here, look at the size of the hook. And the little one underneath, it's like, I don't know, 5 times smaller. It's a big difference. Jansen is asking us here to try putting the other part of the Velcro to see both of them stuck together, to see how the hooking works from one to the other. Basically, these little hooks get tangled in those loose fibers, in the soft fibers, and that's what makes it stick. I think it's not really sticking here because it's a very small piece. If I close the Velcro too much, you won't see it sticking, but here you can see which parts interact. If the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, why do we see the sunset on the Brazilian coast? First, let's explain the question, because that's actually a really interesting thing. There's the sun, and here's planet Earth, which rotates in this direction. That's why we always say that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so that way is east. If you're here in Brazil, you'll see the sun rising over the sea because the sun starts to appear over the sea. As the day goes by, at sunset, you'll see the sun setting over the land. You'll see the sun setting on the other side. Since the coast of Brazil, the part that touches the sea here in our country, is almost always facing the same direction, the consequence is that it's almost impossible for you to see the sun setting over the sea in Brazil. Jansen, who's behind that camera there, has worked for a long time as a wedding photographer. When I asked him the question, he said he already knew the answer since it had caused him problems before. There are couples who ask to be photographed at sunset on a beach. So where can we find a beach in Brazil with a sunset? It's a pretty rare phenomenon, but it does happen. Let me show you on Google Maps. If we look at the coast in general, Brazilian beaches are divided vertically between east and west. This occurs in Espírito Santo and southern Bahia, for instance. But if we go to the coast of São Paulo, you'll notice that especially in this region here between Santos and São Sebastião, the coastline is already positioned horizontally, divided between north and south. And if we zoom in on some beaches here, like let's go here at the end of Boracéia, which is in Bertioga, you'll notice that the beach curves a little, and then this little end of the beach is divided again between east and west, but it's the other way around. The ocean is on the west side. So we have some very specific situations here on the coast of São Paulo. This will happen a lot because of its more horizontal position. I think it will also happen in Salvador. Let's check it out. If you're there at the lighthouse in Salvador, you'll notice that these beaches here, for example, Porto de Barra Beach, are exactly in that opposite position I mentioned. The sea is to the west and the land is to the east. If you go there, you'll likely see the sunset over the water, a rare event in Brazil. And then the photographer can take a picture of the couple kissing at sunset. With the sea in the background all golden, do you have another profession besides recording videos? I appreciate your support, but this question may offend some people, so it makes me sad. Let's avoid sensitive topics that could upset others. Because in the end, it's implied. The question itself suggests that the person asking doesn't consider what you do a real profession, more like a side gig or something you do for fun. But it's okay, I know that wasn't your intention. Yes, I've only been working at Manual do Mundo since then. 2012. Mari and I stopped everything we were doing to do only YouTube. And now, not only YouTube, but also books, lectures, Instagram, Facebook, and everything from Manual do Mundo since 2012. And today, not only do I work only on Manual do Mundo, but we also have a team here of more than 10 people who come here to Manual do Mundo every day and also work only on this. It's funny that at the beginning of YouTube, I used to hear this question a lot because it was very hard for people to understand how it was possible for someone to just record videos and make a living from it. But today I also wonder how it's possible for someone to record videos, publish as frequently as we do, and do something else, because it really takes a lot. It's a lot of work. You're watching this Ibre Responds video, and it seems like, I don't know, the answers are just coming out easily from my mouth. I read the questions here and begin answering. I received over 1,000 of these questions, mainly from Instagram stories, where I placed a question box. Just to select the questions took about 4 hours for me to get a list of 100 questions. I then narrowed down the list to about 30 questions, which I think is still a lot, but I couldn't reduce it further. And then comes the research. It was hours and hours and hours of research, including all the sources I used for this research. They're here in the video description. You'll see that there are endless links, and in the end, recording the video takes a long time, about 2 to 4 hours, give or take. It's a simple Q&A video, not one where we build something that requires more time for editing, publishing, thumbnail creation, and other tasks. So, for those who watch the video, it gives a feeling, I don't know, right? You watch this video in 20 minutes, but it probably took about 40 minutes more or less to make. But it's not quite like that. Sometimes a video takes a whole week of work from a lot of people. Where does the energy go when we break the bicycle? It has to go somewhere, right? After all, energy doesn't come out of nowhere, and it doesn't just disappear either. When we break the bicycle, the movement of the bicycle, which is kinetic energy, is mainly transformed into heat. So, a bicycle with disc brakes, for example, if you touch the disc right after going down a steep hill, you risk burning your hand. Part of that energy also ends up turning into sound. You end up vibrating the air with this braking. Of course, if the brake is out of adjustment, or if some oil leaks onto the disc brake, there will be more sound generated than there normally would be. Or if you skid, for example, that energy will end up being used to wear down the tire, to tear off little pieces of rubber, or to deform the ground where you're passing. And then I know a lot of people are gonna ask, hey ERASER, but you're just wasting energy, isn't it? Turning it into heat is just throwing all the energy away. That's true, and pretty much every car does that. All the time, we're wasting a lot of energy, but that's also why hybrid cars are becoming so popular. Because when you break a hybrid car, it doesn't use the brake pad like usual. First, it tries to use a generator. It connects a generator to the wheel there, which is usually the car's own motor, and it manages to generate energy from that braking. Because when the generator is producing energy, it brakes. It tries to stop. And then that energy is stored in a battery for you to use later, so the hybrid car is able to recover some of the energy that would be wasted during braking. ERASER, what's inside a billiard ball and why is it so hard? What is a billiard ball made of? In the past, these balls were made either of wood, a hardwood, or ivory, which is the elephant's tusk. By the way, a lot of things used to be made of ivory because it must be a really good material to work with, right? It gives a very beautiful, shiny finish. But don't even think about stopping me from making a perfect ivory ball, because I would never have the courage to use a piece from that poor elephant. It was very common. I don't know if it happens much today because there's more protection, but people used to kill elephants just to take the ivory. But don't worry, nowadays ivory isn't used to make billiard balls anymore. It's usually made of polyester resin, which is that resin you buy at the hardware store as plastic putty. One of the most famous brands is ERASER Plastic Putty. If you've never seen it, take a look here on the side. It's that yellow can right there. Now, I don't know about you, but I got really curious to open one up and see what's inside. Let's do it. I've always thought this thing was indestructible. Is it really? Do you think with a little bit of effort we can't see what's inside? Piecing together the story is challenging. It's fragile and breaks easily, far from indestructible. But one cool thing I discovered here is that this white part of the 8 is actually a different plastic inside the other. Look, it's a resin of another color that was put here, and it breaks kind of like glass, shattering everywhere. Why do we use the expression turned into Jiraiya? I see two different situations where we say someone is turned into Jiraiya, either because they're really angry and start yelling at everyone, picking fights with everyone, or because they have a lot of energy. So let's say you're cleaning the house, but today you're turned into Jiraiya. You lift the mattress, turn everything upside down. Anyway, it's a moment when the person has a lot of energy, a lot of drive, whether it's to argue with people or to do something cool. Unfortunately, this Jiraiya thing is from my time. In the 80s, there was a series called Jiraiya, the Incredible Ninja. It was a Japanese series with real actors, not animation. It was about a boy who transformed into a ninja. Jiraiya wore he put on a red helmet and all, a whole red outfit, and he became the ninja Jiraiya. And what's cool is that when the boy transformed into Jiraiya, he fought a bunch of monsters, those Japanese enemies and all, with a lot of energy. He was a ninja, so it was really cool to watch, especially for us kids. That was the most anticipated part of the episode. As for the phrase turned into Jiraiya, I couldn't find any reference for turned, okay? But imagine that we're turned into Jiraiya, because the boy would turn into Jiraiya. So if you're turned into Jiraiya, it means you've already transformed into Jiraiya. So if someone is turned into Jiraiya, they're full of energy to do things in a very agile way with a lot of drive. How do we get goosebumps? Is there muscle beneath the skin? That's an interesting question. When we feel scared, when we feel cold, our hairs stand up. They bristle, and for a hair to stand up, there has to be something underneath. Is there a tiny little muscle at the base of the hair? Actually, yes, there is a tiny little muscle, and that means our skin is full of these small muscles all over. But the coolest thing is the name of this muscle. In Latin, since some people use the Latin name, right? It's called musculus erector pili. It's the muscle that makes the hair stand up, but in Portuguese, I also found it referred to as the horripilator muscle. Yes, horripilator. It's a horrifying muscle. And then it hits you, right? Which makes perfect sense, because horrifying, horripilator, that pill at the end, has to do with hair. And in Latin, horrere means to bristle, to tremble. So, horrifying is something that makes your hair stand on end. And that's why we say something is horrifying, because you get goosebumps when you see it. When water boils, where do the bubbles come from? Does air pass through the metal of the pan? This is the kind of question that seems silly, but it's going to catch you by surprise. No, the air is not going to pass through the metal of the pan. There's no way for air to get through there, but when you start boiling water, the first bubbles that appear, they're made of air. They're not water vapor. It's because the gases in the air, oxygen, nitrogen, they dissolve in the water, they stay there, kind of hidden among the water molecules. So that's how, for example, a fish is able to breathe. It doesn't get the oxygen from H2O, that O that's in the water molecule. It gets the oxygen that's dissolved in the water, the O2 itself that's hidden there among the water molecules. What happens is that when you start heating the water, you decrease the solubility of oxygen in the water. To put it more simply, it just means that you can dissolve less oxygen in hot water than in cold water. So when the water starts to heat up, that oxygen starts to leave. And those first little bubbles that appear there are actually oxygen or other gases that are in the air. It's not boiling water yet, and then when the water gets close to the boiling point, close to 100 degrees, that's when we'll really see some big bubbles, which are nothing more than water in its gaseous state. It's the water that was liquid, turning into gas. But as a gas, it takes up much more space. So just a little bit of water that turns into gas already forms a huge bubble and starts to boil. It really starts to bubble. At the autograph session, do you need to get a ticket the day before? What is the price of the ticket for autographs? I don't know if you guys already know, but the big biology book from Manuel do Mundo has just arrived. This is another addition to our collection of large books. It's a beautiful 500-page volume with excellent illustrations. And we're going to do that classic launch of Manuel do Mundo's books together with the book Mysteries of the Universe. So here on the side, I'm leaving the dates and cities where I'll be going, signing autographs and everything. These are events organized by the bookstores. So first thing, yes, you do need a ticket to get an autograph there and to chat with me a bit, because sometimes more people show up than I can handle. Then I have time to meet, so usually the bookstores set aside 300 tickets. These tickets are normally per family. If you go with your dad, brother, grandpa, etc., you can get in line together with a single ticket. To get this ticket, you don't have to pay anything, okay? The bookstore usually just asks that you have the book because it's a book launch event. You'll probably need to get it in advance, but the rules vary by bookstore, so what's the usual approach? We ask people to contact the bookstore through Instagram. On our Instagram, there's a pinned post with the release dates, and there you'll find the profile of each location where we'll be launching. And then you ask them how the password will work. Some places ask you to arrive in advance. The bookstore organizes when you can get it, which varies. Some allow you to get it the day before, while others open up a week in advance. And I don't know, the bookstore in Macapá is different from the bookstore in Londrina. For example, they like to organize things in a different way. Anyway, here at Manual, we don't have much control over that. But I guarantee that we do everything we can to serve as many people as possible, in the best way possible. And anyone who went to the launch of the Manuel do Mundo book knows that I'm really there to talk to you, take pictures, and sign the books. And it's something that always makes me very happy at the end of the day to have done, because it's strange to record here. Jansen, our cameraman, is behind the camera. Gabby manages our Instagram and other social media. She helps us record the videos, but I don't see you. I don't see the faces of you who watch the videos. And when there's a book launch, it's an opportunity to meet you up close. For those who don't live in the cities where the launch is happening, next semester we'll do a few more. But if you want to buy the book, I'm leaving the link below for all the books and all the Manuel do Mundo products. We have a little page on Amazon with everything. It's easier for you to find. Just click below, okay? There's a question that Bybrae answered in the past, but we ended up not publishing it because we didn't have an illustration, and now we do. Check it out. If Amapá is surrounded by rivers on all sides, why isn't it considered an island? This question is trickier than it appears. I consulted my friend Olavo, who runs the channel Esclave about geography. He enjoys studying country and state borders, and he'll provide the answer.
Hey Pereira, hey everyone from Manuel do Mundo, how are you? Amapá is the most isolated state in Brazil, lacking connections with other states. Its only road connection is with French Guiana via the binational bridge. On the map, Amapá resembles a diamond. On one side, there's the Atlantic Ocean, and on the other, three rivers that mark the territory, the Silgiari, Oiapoque, and Amazonas. But you can't really call Amapá an island, and for two reasons. The first is because the separation between Amapá and French Guiana isn't entirely made by a watercourse. It's not completely done by a river or something that separates the two places. There's a stretch of the border between Amapá and French Guiana that's dry, that's made by land. There's no fixed connection, Despite virtually no human settlement, there is a land bridge connecting Amapá and French Guiana. Moreover, Amapá is part of a massive island called Ilha das Guianas, so it cannot be considered an island itself. That whole region, in a way, can be considered a single island. The territory spans Amapá, Guyana, French Guiana, Suriname, parts of Venezuela, Colombia, and Brazilian states like Roraima, Pará, and Amazonas. And the main key point for us to understand the formation of this Guiana island, this giant island, is a place called the Cassiquiare Canal. The Cassiquiare Canal is a waterway that connects the Orinoco River, which is the most famous river in Venezuela, and our Rio Negro, which is one of the tributaries of the Amazon. Because of this connection between the Orinoco and the Rio Negro, there is a large canal, a big water circuit that separates this entire huge region. That's how the Guiana island is formed. That's it. I hope I helped, and I'll see you in the next one. A hug, Ibaré!
If gravity pulls everything down, why doesn't the atmosphere collapse onto the surface of the Earth? When I was a kid, I used to read a comic book called Asterix. He's a character created over in France and all, and he goes on a lot of adventures set about 50 years or so before the birth of Christ. And one of the greatest fears of his people, the Gauls, was that the sky would fall on their heads. And in this question, I see that it's kind of like that, right? The notion that the sky is something solid, something that's up there and could suddenly fall on our heads. But the news is that the sky has already fallen. There isn't an atmosphere that's up there and that we see from afar. Actually, the atmosphere is right here. It's in our environment. The air starts right from the ground and extends for several kilometers above us. So when we talk about the atmosphere, it's not something distant. It's something we're inside of, like a fish inside an aquarium. So there's no way for the atmosphere to fall onto the Earth because it's already on top of the Earth. It's already pressing down on the Earth. It's already putting pressure on everything here, which we call atmospheric pressure. The cool thing is that this leads us to a second question. Why isn't there a clear line where space begins? Why does the air get thinner and not just end suddenly? First, it's good for us to think about why the atmosphere doesn't just go away. Why doesn't the air that's here just leave for space? Why doesn't it escape and go away? Because gravity is pulling it. Gravity pulls oxygen, nitrogen, and other gas molecules close to it. But this causes the pressure I just mentioned. So when we're down here, on the ground, these atoms, these molecules are closer to each other. So here we have very concentrated air, like I mentioned in that question about the balloon that escapes to the stratosphere. As we go higher, these molecules get farther and farther apart until it reaches a point where they're so distant that a plane can't fly anymore. Because the airplane's propellers don't even have air to push against, the wings have nothing to support them, and the engines don't have any oxygen to work with. Do you know what happens where planes can't fly anymore? That's where space begins. That's how we define the difference between the atmosphere and space. We accept that this place is about 100 kilometers in altitude, which we call the Kármán line. So for a person to be considered an astronaut, they have to travel in a vehicle that crosses the Kármán line that goes higher than 100 kilometers in altitude. In the United States, they consider it a little lower, but there's a debate there because some people almost reach the Kármán line, and they want to consider those people astronauts, so it's complicated, but let's agree that 100 kilometers is also a very round number. It's a very neat number. There's no exact point where this happens, especially because it depends on the type of airplane, the type of spacecraft, etc. A satellite at this altitude can orbit Earth without significant atmospheric disturbance, as it doesn't constantly collide with air. However, it's not an ideal distance for satellites. There isn't a precise point where space begins. The transition happens gradually. And if we look at how far we can find molecules that came from Earth, gas molecules that originated from Earth, you'll see research showing that there are hydrogen molecules that are part of Earth's atmosphere that are farther away than the moon. In brief, there is no clear division between black and white. It's all more complicated than it seems because the air doesn't just stop existing at a certain point in the atmosphere. Taking advantage of the question related to astronomy, I'll remind you that Manuel do Mundo has launched a new category within Obafog, which is the rocket competition of the Brazilian Astronomy Olympiad. They've had the polyethylene terephthalate bottle rocket competition there for many years, and now there's a new category, which is the two-stage rocket. We made the first video of the year showing how to make a rocket like this, which is basically a rocket that goes up and halfway it drops one stage and then propels itself with another stage. It gives a second boost there in the middle of the way, just like a real rocket does. The competition is really cool as it unites people doing the same thing, allowing you to meet many great individuals. But one very important thing, to sign up, and it's free to sign up, okay? It's until May 1st, and the students have to sign up together with the teachers. So if you're a student who wants to participate, invite a teacher to join you. The link is down here in the video description, okay? Why aren't there any more ocean liners? To start off here, what exactly is an ocean liner? It's a ship that crosses the Atlantic Ocean to take people from one side to the other. It's a ship that's used to transport people across the Atlantic Ocean. Maybe the most famous example is this one I'm holding in my hand, which is the Titanic. The Titanic is from 1912, and it was from 1912. And it used to cross the passage between England and the United States through the North Atlantic. Actually, it didn't cross, right? It was going to cross because it couldn't even finish its first trip. But anyway, its brother, the Olympic, used to cross all the time. This trip wasn't like the cruises we know today, okay? These cruise ships, you go on them to have fun inside the ship, to enjoy the things they have there, which are cool. Sometimes you get off at a beach, watch a show, go to the pool. The ocean liners, they were really for people to go to another country. Their main interest often wasn't to enjoy the ship, it was simply to take a means of transportation to another country. In 1912, for example, no matter how much money you had, there were no planes for you to take and do that. You had to take a ship. And then you must have realized that this is the problem, right? When airplanes started to become cheaper, more efficient, and air travel became safe, people started to abandon the ocean liners. Why would you spend several days on a crossing like that when you can take a plane and in a few hours you're on the other side of the Atlantic? In the end, so few people want to make this trip that today there's only one ocean liner operating in the world, which is the Queen Mary 2. I found it odd when I read that. I thought, aren't those massive white ships with pools on top considered ocean liners? There are so many cruise ships out there. The truth is, these ships are capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and sometimes they do. They can make the crossing, but a true ocean liner, the original kind, has a different hull design. It's built to cross the ocean quickly. Cruise ships aren't. They're made for people to travel more slowly, to enjoy the trip, and more than that, they don't operate on a set route like a plane or a bus. The only regular route where you can actually buy a ticket to cross the ocean is on the Queen Mary 2. But I know there are people who got curious. I did too, to find out how much a trip like that costs, how many days it takes, and all that, right? I found here on the official website a 7-day trip leaving from New York in the United States, going to Southampton in England, departing on May 23rd and arriving on May 30th. It costs $1,009 with, of course, accommodation included because you'll have to sleep on the ship for 7 days, and breakfast is included too. It was cheaper than I expected. I thought it would be really expensive. It's not that expensive because if you get a plane ticket, think about the hotel, breakfast, and everything else, it would come out to about the same amount, right? But we've come to the final question. Why doesn't the ERASER erase colored pencil? The first thing we have to do to find out why something happens is to see if it actually happens. So let's make a mark here. Regular graphite pencil and blue colored pencil, which is almost the same color as the graphite here. Let's rub the eraser over them side by side. Let's go. The pencil is coming off 100%, the graphite is disappearing, and the colored pencil still stays a lot. It doesn't come off completely. Now let's do the microscopic analysis of the thing. Let's look at this very closely to see the difference. Make a neat sample so I don't embarrass myself in front of people who work with microscopes. This here is the mark from regular graphite, from a regular pencil on paper. You can notice that little pieces of graphite get embedded in the fibers of the paper. That little piece of graphite stays there. Let's get to the part that was erased. Here's where it started to be erased. You can see that it's almost completely gone. A little further up, there's practically no graphite left there. The eraser took everything away. Now let's go to the other side. This one is the colored pencil. You can notice that it looks kind of wet, like there's a liquid on the paper. And as I go up to the point where it was erased, or tried to be erased, you can see that it didn't all go away. Some of it stayed on the paper. Something got stuck there. And worse, it's kind of smeared. It's not just where the line was. It looks like this liquid, as I used the eraser, it got smeared. It got spread around. First, what is the graphite in the pencil? The graphite in the pencil is carbon. It's an arrangement of the chemical element carbon mixed with a bit of clay. In short, it's an almost black powder, a dark gray, that when you run it over the paper, it gets stuck in the fibers of the paper. But it's a powder that is also strongly attracted to the eraser. So if you run the eraser over this powder, it will stick to the eraser, and as you rub the eraser even more, it will start to release pieces. It will release pieces of itself that were dirty with graphite. So the eraser is self-cleaning, but this doesn't work very well with colored pencils because colored pencil isn't a powder. It has a bit of wax. Its consistency is very similar to crayon, and wax isn't a powder. It gets embedded in the paper. It sticks to the paper almost like a liquid. When you use the eraser, only part of it sticks to the eraser, and the rest ends up being smeared across the paper. It's like you're cleaning a chocolate on the paper. In other words, on one side, you have an almost perfect cleaning, and on the other side, you basically have a smear. Let's try to look at the eraser covered in graphite. It's kind of gross, right? It looks like a slimy surface. The graphite has fully penetrated the eraser, making it dark. There's a small blue object of unknown origin. Let me zoom out on the microscope a bit. That's better. Look here, a little piece of eraser that mixed with the graphite and came off the paper. Cute. I mean, unless it wasn't.
Skid mark.
This looks like a little poop, doesn't it?